good afternoon. Usually I give this in the morning, so I say good morning, but good afternoon. So who owns that open source brand? And I have a sort of little selection of brands up here. And one of them you might recognize is not a software brand, but is nonetheless an important brand that we think of when we come here to lovely Berlin, the little Berlin bear. So this is all thinking about trademarks and brands and how you perceive all these great open source projects, whether they're from Apache or from somebody else. So really briefly about me, my name is Curcuru. I've been doing this stuff for a while, and while I may play a trademark lawyer on the internet, I am not actually a lawyer, and I'm certainly not your lawyer. So later on we have a little game about where we try and find the lawyers in the room. Well, I'll let you know when that one comes up. But you really want to hear about why we're here today. Why do brands matter? What are brands and trademarks? Because a lot of people, there are a lot of misconceptions, and even among people who are well versed in this area, trademarks are kind of complicated on one level. You don't really need to understand all of it, but you need to understand a little bit of it to have a useful conversation. And why do we care? We just want to make our code run. Well, that's fine if you want to write your code run. It's great, but having anybody else find your code, well, that's a bigger question, and then you do that through a brand or a trademark. That's how they find who you are. And we have a concept that I've come up with. We all talk about open source, and that's sort of a very, very broad topic. But really, I think we need to talk about, there are 3 levels of open. Because open source really has a definition about software. When we talk about open source as a culture, a community, as a way of life. So thinking about it in a bigger perspective, this is what I would say are the 3 levels of being open in our industry. And some of these are applicable to other industries. Open data and open government are an important area that are growing a lot too. So open source software, sort of what we all usually say and think about, that really means the code. The code is licensed under an OSI, approved, so to speak, license, and you know when you get it that you have certain rights to it. There are certain expectations that are well shared. Quite frankly, from my perspective, that's not very interesting, because open source is infinitely forkable. Like my code, your code, the code in the repo over there, just take it, copy it, go someplace else. Okay, that's fine. That's what open source is about. But what's interesting are communities that drive projects. So that's the second part that's really the second level of open, is your community open? Does everybody have a say in direction of the project? Now this is something we should all be familiar with, because this is how Apache projects work. You can get voted into the PMC and have a say in your community and where your project will go, checking in your code, adding new committers. So the one thing a lot of people don't think about is open brands. So there are plenty of open source projects who have a trademark or a brand, or you know their name, but who owns that trademark? When push comes to shove, if something wrong happens between all the different people working on the project, who can control the trademark? And at the ASF, it's Apache. The ASF owns all project trademarks on behalf of their communities, and we're a US corporation, so we have standing to do so. But that's not the case in all other projects. And of course, a lot of projects are owned by companies, effectively, so they own the trademark. So this is my sort of posit to you about this talk. I believe that an open source project's most important asset is its brand, and through that, its trademarks. Because that's how people find out about your project over the long term. Your public perception is your brand. That's how they will see you. That's how they will decide if they want to come to your project. And it's the only part of a project that you can't fork. Code is infinitely forkable. Communities ebb and flow for many reasons. But trademarks are explicitly a single point of control, legally. So I believe that the brand, the trademark behind a project, is a thing you can control, and is also very important for longevity. So we'll see what people think about my crazy idea here at the end of the talk. So it's after lunch. Let's make sure everybody's awake. We'll have a quiz time. Okay? A lot of this talk is about things you didn't realize about specific projects out there that you maybe thought you did or maybe you hadn't thought of at all. So the first one is, who owns this brand? Okay, we already have a spoiler in the front row. But until this is actually a slightly old slide. So the lovable yellow elephant for Hadoop, some people might have thought it was that cloudy company. Until recently, some people might have thought it was that Horton-y company. Or could it be a trade association or a nonprofit? Or could it be Doug Cutting? Because Doug Cutting actually named the elephant after a lovable stuffed elephant. Well, of course, the answer is, as we have heard, is a nonprofit charity. So the Hadoop trademark, the word mark, excuse me, not this graphical logo technically, is a registered trademark of the Apache Software Foundation in the US and in other countries. Which means that ownership is with Apache, no one else. So who owns this brand? I hope a bunch of people recognize this one. It's a little beloved hardware maker of tiny little computers on single board. So is this a commercial company that's out for profit? Is it a business trade association? So in the US, this is a sort of a clear distinction. It's a little bit different in Europe here. A 501c6 tax designation in the US is a association of companies that the association is not taxed, but they can't accept donations. So it's a business league for those businesses to promote some common goal. In the US, there's also a nonprofit charity, which I think a lot of people in Europe, there are a lot of different ways to do it in Europe, but in the US, it's a 501c3. Now, the tax laws in the US ensure that there's a charitable purpose for your organization. That's part of getting this designation. And then, of course, people can donate to us, to Apache, tax-free, which is a big benefit to our donors. In the US, yes. Yes, and I'm not giving any financial advice because I would be very good at it. And the other question we might ask is, there are all these organizations, but there are also BFDLs, or benevolent dictators for life, right? There are some projects who are run by individuals, or a lot were started by individuals. Yeah. So could it be an individual who was on this one? So Arduino now is owned by Arduino AG Switzerland, a commercial company. Now, depending on which time in the past 5 years I've given this talk, for several years it was obvious there was one company. For several years they had a trademark litigation, I presume I'm not sure if it was in Switzerland or the EU or where, between two commercial companies who both had a claim on it, because some of them had done it in one country, some had done another. And I'm sure some of the original creators of Arduino had argued. That took up a significant amount of time and expense arguing in court between the different companies who owned the brand. They both kept shipping products that worked, but the brand ownership was controversial. Luckily, they did make amends. The two companies effectively merged. So now the shared corporate interests own the single mark for the single or the set of lines of products. But imagine if they hadn't had to spend that time arguing. So here's another hopefully obvious giant W symbol, which of course is the world's probably most popular blogging platform, WordPress. Long history, big impact, very simple logo. The question is, who owns this brand? So this is actually legally owned by a nonprofit charity in the US called the WordPress Foundation. So they are a nonprofit. So they can, on behalf of their community, own the trademark, which is great. On the other hand, there's a company called Automatic, which is sort of the commercial power behind WordPress, and the founder is the one who started WordPress. If you look at the boards of directors of the two companies, at least last time I did, there was an immense amount of overlap, of course, and Matt Mullenweg, the CEO of Automatic, still has a lot of personal power in that project. So I would argue that I'm not quite sure where this one, if push came to shove, who would actually make the final decision, whether it would be the directors from the commercial company or from the open source foundation. So that's a little bit tricky. Luckily, it doesn't seem to be a problem. That seems to be a happy community. That's great when it works. we'll get to that later. Wait, please, wait. I have things to say. So I can hear you ask, those are pretty pictures, Shane, but what's really so important about these brands? Well, brands are how the world hears about your project. It's how people decide when they're first going to go download a new tool, which one to go look at, which one to go buy for a commercial product, which one to go contribute to for one of our open source projects. In the commercial world, that's one thing, and you have marketing departments. But in the open source world, we work differently, both in terms of how we inside the project work, and also how we work with the larger world. Because really, open source, it's not a business economy. It's not a funds economy. It's an attention economy. Open source projects fundamentally need to find attention. We need to capture somebody to start with so they get potentially interested, and then hopefully they will end up contributing. Maybe they'll become a committer someday. And that's how our project survives. That's how we live. Whether it's an individual contributor who's a volunteer or a college student, or whether it's a company that's looking for where they want to bet their next CMS on, we need to attract them in some way to continue to live by drawing in contributors. So I'm saying brands here, which is what we perceive, but it's not always clear, and this is just a hard problem overall, is what's a brand and what's a trademark? So very, very briefly, the brand is all the things that we talk about. The feather, we have the beautiful full-size Apache feather here, and of course our logo here, right? All those images, the Apache name, are part of the brand. A trademark is, let's think of, it's a legal instantiation of the brand. It's the parts, it's not the whole brand, what we would think of. It's the part of the brand that the law has enshrined in whatever country you're in that lets you control that. So here's where we play another game. Are there any lawyers in the room today? So if you look around and if you see somebody twitch when the next slide comes up, well, then we know where the lawyers are. Because I would like to describe trademark concepts in 30 seconds. Okay, it's probably going to be 2 minutes, but okay, I didn't really see anybody twitching, so we don't have any lawyers in the room, because any lawyers who don't understand trademark law will be like, you can't possibly, no, it's wait, and whatever. A trademark is the legal instantiation of brand. It's something that we make to show the world that the law has specific definitions about. And what the thing itself, the trademark is, it needs to be a very specific image or word, and consistent. You need to use the same exact image or word or logo for a product or a service. You can't keep changing the name a little bit. It needs to be very consistent. Because the purpose is that in law, for trademarks, the purpose is to associate that image in the minds of consumers, because these are people who we don't know yet, with our product. Not just a product, not your product, not her product. My product has my trademark. So really I would say the main purpose of trademarks, in one way, is to present consumer confusion as to the source of goods. So it's really, trademarks are about people who don't know us yet finding which software product they want to buy, finding which peanut butter jar they want to buy by seeing the branding. And the key part here is that we prevent consumer confusion, newcomers, as to the source of goods. So the point of a trademark is to tie this specific symbol to a specific organization that provides a product or service. That's what trademark law is about. And ensuring then that if we have built up reputation in our lovely Apache feather, that no one else can attempt to use a similar feather to try to capitalize on our goodwill. Because that would confuse somebody as to, is it an Apache project or not? The key point is that trademarks can only be owned effectively by a single organization. Because you can't tie the consumer's perception to a single group if you have multiple companies making the same thing. Now there are some ways that you can license trademarks, mostly for physical products, but there's still an expectation that when you buy a Lego set, for example, that whether or not Lego in Denmark actually made that brick, that the quality will be the same that you expect, right? Companies outsource manufacturing with specific criteria. They review how it's working. Because when a consumer gets their Lego brick, they know exactly what to expect because it says Lego brick on it. So let's bring us back to software and the purpose of the talk. Trademarks are not forkable because they must associate the product with a single source of origin, with a single producer or company. And as I said earlier, trademarks are really, if we think about assets, if we want to get corporate for a minute, think about assets, a trademark is really the only asset that most open source projects have. We have all the people who choose to work with us, that's great. We have all of our code, which everybody can fork, and it's the brand and the goodwill with it. It's the only thing we can actually control. So who owns all these trademarks? Because they're this legal thing. And a trademark owner can enforce their mark, either through social methods or through legal methods. So who owns the trademarks behind the software? Because that's a different place that a lot of people don't think about, but the owner can actually enforce use of it, which if you're a larger community means some members of your community may disagree with code direction or product direction, whatever. Whoever owns the trademark can define where that logo appears. So that's a measure of control that is sort of hidden in a lot of open source communities. So let's go back to our game, quiz time. So who owns this long-lived brand? Yeah, yes, I know, I should have just, could you go sit in the back maybe or something? So is it a commercial company, a trade association, nonprofit, or an individual? Of course, it is a commercial company. It is Oracle. It is also not open source, really. I suppose that's kind of obvious because it's always sort of been in that realm. But then the question is, who owns this lovable little seal for MariaDB? So if you're thinking about choosing your database and you're a company, you want to invest, but you want to make sure you're investing in the long term, who is going to be controlling that over the long term? Well, there's a foundation, the MariaDB Foundation. They have a good reputation in terms of community, but it's actually MariaDB Corporation that owns the trademark. They still effectively can manage the long-term direction of the product. So the community is certainly involved, but it's the company behind it that owns this. So why is this important for example, your company? If you're a manager or an employee or somebody working in a place, you're trying to think of your business. Where do I want to invest my time? Where do I want to base my software stack on, which is going to be hard to move later on? Well, we all use open source. When we're using it for a significant part, we need to think about risk management. So in the old world, for open source, that was simple. You would go to different vendors and they would give you costs, and then you would balance the cost with the expectations. In open source, a lot of it's free in some way. So there's a lot bigger set of choices out there. And the choices, you may not know who is behind the choice. That affects project velocity and how much the project's going to innovate. Is there a company behind it driving it who also owns it and may drive it that way? Or is it really a community that will accept new input? Which is, of course, the question. If you're a software company, you want to know, if I'm going to base my emphasis on this product for whatever reason, will my engineers be able to influence it? Will I be able to add the new features I need to the core product so I can then compete over here? And understanding who is behind that software project is a critical part of thinking about the long-term direction of any open source project. So here's a sort of slightly longer story. Who recognizes this brand? Just raise your hand. How many recognize this? Oh, okay, there are a lot of people who do. That's great. So this was Node Forward, as in Node.js. This is a widely reported fork of Node.js with, of course, a new name that never really got development traction that I can see, but had a lot of people talking about it for a while. Trademark ownership, we don't care. As far as I know, it's completely dead. So who recognizes this brand? We have a few people, but a few fewer, with an IO. Well, it's also known as io.js, which is another major Node.js fork. When they forked, they had to choose a new name, which not many people remember. It was a slightly different community, created a new name, added some new features, and effectively, in that case, most of the code seems to have come back to Node.js. So good overall, although there's a lot of effort on splitting attention.
It's actually the same fork. They had to rename it because Node went after their use of that word.
OK. At this point, however, it's immaterial because, as far as we can tell, it's dead, and whatever work they've done has either come back or been forgotten. So the question is, who recognizes this brand? Which if you, there's somebody in the back who right away raised their hand. If you spell it out, it's IO, but if you say it, it could be AO. This is another major fork of Node.js from early 2017. And this fork, which of course, yet again, chose a new name that intentionally riffed on the IO name, but nonetheless had to come up with new graphics, new logos, draw attention. There was mostly a governance and inclusivity issues fork. They were arguing about how the project leaders decided to bring in new committers and do their directions. So this made a lot of noise. A lot of people talked about it, which I presume, took away time from doing the development, but seems to then have fizzled out. So the last commit was more than a year ago at this point, and trademark ownership, who really cares? So here's an easy one. That's what we're talking about. It's pretty obvious. It's the Node.js project. So the real question is, OK, let's think. Who owns this brand? And I'm betting you probably don't know the actual owner. Yes, so actually, Joyent Incorporated, a commercial company, legally is the trademark holder of the Node.js logo and name. They have since been completely bought by by Samsung, so they're a wholly owned subsidiary. But the trademark ownership is still different. And what many people think of is a lot of people see the Node.js project at the Linux Foundation, which is a trade association. It's a 501c6 in the US. So you think that, OK, it's the Linux Foundation, it's the trade association. If you can get onto the board of that project, or you can commit, and if you're serious, they'll give you part of the project direction to help shape. Well, there may well be agreements that are hidden, but Joyent, not the Linux Foundation, and not whatever organizational group the Linux Foundation has for their foundation, Joyent is the one that actually owns the trademark. So I imagine somebody was surprised to hear that, because I had not known that it was still Joyent, not the Linux Foundation. But I don't think that'll ever be an issue, because they seem to be pretty aligned, but you don't know. Samsung owns Joyent now, and do you understand Samsung and trust them long term? We'll find out. But imagine if all those efforts had gone into innovation in the stuff we care about, functionality, code, actual community building, instead of trademark fights, coming up with new brands. Of course, when you come up with a new brand, you have to spend a lot of time promoting it, because nobody knows who you are yet. Forks split your attention. Both of the people who are actually doing the work, and of course sometimes they want to fork and they have a good reason they believe in it. That's great, but forks also split the public attention. Who's going to use your new thing? And you can make a few splashes when you start something new, but if you don't have any reputation yet, the newcomers are going to be harder to find for the new fork, especially if it's a stable ecosystem where all the regular people completely understand the original company. So trademarks are not forkable. Trademarks only belong to one organization. So that really is, if we think in business terms again, your trademark is a control point. Because you can define Node.js said, no, you can't call yourself Node.js. Go great, make software, it's open source, that's fine. But we're Node.js, and that's the domain name everybody's going to come to when they search. So have fun. So a lot of us, maybe contributors, maybe just developers here at ApacheCon. So why is this important for you as an individual? What do I care about this? Well, I believe this is important because it knows, as an individual, whether you're a consultant or you're going between jobs, you can know how to participate in project governance. Right? If you show up at some corporate-dominated project, will they bother accepting your patches? Will they be welcoming and help you get involved in the community? Will they want to add you to the project management committee? So at the ASF, you know, if you can show merit in a project, you'll get elected as committer, you can become a PMC member, and then set the direction, vote on releases. That's not always clear in some projects. And the fundamental driver is who owns that project namespace, so to speak. And of course, the other one is that it's a reputation. There's another great talk that talked about part of the individual actions we have in open source can be thought of as a gift economy. Because in one way, we are giving away our work to everyone else. Because, of course, in the end, it's more efficient for me if I'm a business. But as an individual, your contributions stick with you. When you change companies, you're still an Apache committer here. And you're still, you know, a FreeBSD committer over there. That's for you. That's your reputation that you build up. So understanding if the reputation space within a project brand, the project community, is something where you'll be recognized and noted, and you can really capitalize on, or if it's really just effectively a commercial repo that, not commercial, but an open source repo, but that isn't very exciting, and that some company in 2 years is going to say, oh, we're not interested in it anymore, and they turn it off, and it goes away. Now, the code may still be somewhere, but the reputation isn't there. So understanding that difference is important, even for individuals, just whether it's your part of a day job somehow, or whether it's just your fun project. So here's another story. So who recognizes the dapper butler here? Okay, a few people. I thought there might be more, but I guess it's been a little while. And who do you think owns, of course, Hudson, the beloved butler who will handle your continuous integration? Well, Hudson is owned by a commercial company, Oracle. I mean, very commercial company. So they legally own the trademark. And this is important because, well, let's get into that in a second. Who recognizes this logo? Another dapper butler. So I see more hands going up now. Because this is, of course, Jenkins, as it said, who's a continuous or integration server. And where did Jenkins come from? Well, when Oracle was moving Hudson, maybe perhaps too slowly, for the developers who had things to do and had code to add, they wanted to add new things. Oracle said, no, it's not part of our roadmap. They said, okay, well, can we go fork? Sure, take the code. But sorry, no, you can't take the trademark. So Jenkins, since Oracle refused to either let them work on the project the way they wanted, or to use the license at all, the trademark, excuse me, they, of course, went off to create their own group who went to the nonprofit charity. So Jenkins is legally owned as a trademark in the US by Software in the Public Interest, which is a 501c3, so you can accept donations. So Jenkins is run by a group of volunteers who are the core committers who run the project. And they go to Software in the Public Interest, which is a foundation kind of like Apache, that serves as a legal hook for donations, trademark ownership, any other legal process that they might for some reason need. The difference between Apache and SPI, software in the public interest, is that they essentially are merely a sort of holding company that says, hey, if you want help with this legal stuff, sign up with us, we'll do it for you. At Apache, we have an entire community model in a way, which is we provide a lot more services for projects, which some projects like, some projects want it simple. That's great. But you know that if you contribute to Jenkins, an independent group will be looking at your work. And then you can understand from the people there if you believe you'll have a say. You'll be given a say if you do work, where they're going in the future. So as we heard earlier, who owns this brand? Very, very popular. Yes, so this is, Drupal is actually owned by Dries. This is owned by an individual, the founder of the project, who it's registered at least in the US, I presume in other countries at this point. So while the foundation has strong governance, and from what I've heard, they have a great community, nonetheless, Dries, the owner of the trademark, he has a final say, kind of like Linus and Linux. He owns the trademark. He doesn't answer to anyone for that. Now, I don't think it would ever be an issue, but you know, you might have thought it was the foundation and you could have a say, and it's different. So this brings us back to a way to think about the activity we all do here in terms of 3 levels of open. Because we know open source, and open source really defines the software. Like we have a good definition of open source or free software. They're fairly well understood to mean what we all mean when we're saying the terms. But we often say, oh, that's an open source project, when we're actually talking about open governance. So some repo on GitHub with a bunch of people contributing, okay, whoever owns the repo, as we saw recently with a separate case in Chef and another issue, where companies were using code from an individual's repo for a popular project, open source, and the individual deleted their repo. So if you're contributing there, then you're sort of reliant on that individual being around. Open governance is what we have here at Apache, where we have an organization behind the project. We have an explicit model whereby you can contribute, you can gain merit, you can see where you'll be able to be given a say in the project direction in the future. That's really what we kind of mean much of the time when we talk about open source projects, really is we're thinking they're open source governance at the Linux Foundation or at Software Freedom Conservancy or an independent one. The thing I think we need to start thinking about, and I don't know how to say it other than open brand, is the brand behind some popular project, is it actually owned by a nonprofit charity? Or is it owned by an individual or a single corporation? So if we go back to think about Drupal, certainly sounds like it's going to be fine. We're not going to need to worry about it because he is completely tied up with the project and right, same direction. What happens if something happens to his health? Who knows? I recently heard about somebody who, for a reason, was talking about their will, and they stated that in their will, they directed their executor to delete all of their software repositories. So the code's open source, but you can't find the original copy anymore, so it's hard to use. But that was just a kind of surprising. I never would have thought about that, about this particular project, that if that person went away or something happened to them, their code would go away. Which is very different from having an organization that supports the development model, that supports the code. Apache in particular, we will always have our code available on servers. As long as the ASF exists, you can get any past release that we've approved. That's important for longevity. But a brand, really, you only can trust it if it's owned by a nonprofit in some ways. So we'll go back to my original statement, which is if we think about assets, an open source project's most important asset is the brand. And through it, It's the trademark underneath the brand, right? The specific legal instantiation of the brand. And it's the brand really because the brand is how the world sees us. These are all the images and words and ways we talk about our project that can draw new contributors to us and not to some other project. That's the most important thing that we can control. Everything else is we rely on all of you to show up and volunteer. We can control the brand, which is the way we hope more people will be here next year. So I have some question time. It's about 10 minutes, right? Okay. Who has specific? Should we go through question time or should we go through a few more quick quiz times? Okay, I think I'll do quiz time really quick. So who owns this brand, the lovable little Tux Penguin? Who owns this trademark, rather? I should have changed the slide to say trademark. Well, nobody, really. Now, Larry Ewing, the original author who wrote this specific, as far as I understand, this specific graphic, he owns the copyright on that penguin, not on necessarily all the other penguins. But it was never, or certainly is not currently, legally trademarked. So technically, other people could try to use this as a trademark. There really isn't a good control here. Of course, the important one is who owns this brand, the Linux wordmark. We certainly know that's protected. This is actually, kind of interesting, legally owned by Linus Torvalds. So this is owned by an individual. Now, part of that ownership is very clearly and stated licensed in a very strong way to the Linux Foundation. So it's really a business trade association that is going to control this long term. But technically, Linus's name is still on the registrations. Who owns this one? If anybody remembers SendMail with the little swoopy thing. This is a commercial company. So it started out as an individual who, I don't recall if he registered it, but he used it himself. Ended up getting acquired and getting acquired again. And it is now legally owned by Proofpoint in the US. Here's a good one. So who owns this brand? Okay, I hope everybody's going to get this one right, because this one, NetBeans, is now Apache NetBeans, because Oracle, yes, has finally filled out all the paperwork, and NetBeans is completely at the ASF. Oracle has no say over it anymore. Thank you for the applause. Yes, we're very proud to have succeeded with that and gotten everything out of Oracle's. Oracle was actually pretty good through the transition. It took a very long time, but they did it right. So who owns this one? OwnCloud is a commercial company, which lets you run your own cloud. Pretty descriptive. But some of the company members decided they wanted to work in a different direction. So they, including a founder, forked the software and created another company called NextCloud, because the first company still wanted to be OwnCloud. So now we have OwnCloud and NextCloud. They had to divorce the people and the trademarks when they did it. Real quickly, who owns the Debian wonderful swirl, which I always kind of thought was pretty cute. This, again, Debian has chosen to go to the software in the public interest. So Debian is run by a very, very strong community, but the trademarks, their nonprofit fundraising, is all done within the SPI organization, and Debian does everything else themselves. This one was a little interesting. So jQuery, which we all still use but isn't really hot anymore because JavaScript frameworks have a life cycle of, 3 days? This is actually owned, what was interesting, for a while they went independent. They had their own governance group that went to the Software Freedom Conservancy, which is a nonprofit public charity and works much like Apache or SPI, where they will be a legal home for you. They mostly let you do your own governance. The jQuery group actually decided to leave them and go to the Linux Foundation, which is a business trade association. So legally, that Linux Foundation is who owns jQuery, the trademark, today. And they, of course, have the foundation has a governance board for the project internally and so on and so forth, but the Linux Foundation itself owns the trademark. And I don't think they'll be giving it up anytime soon. So those are just some things that I hope were surprising, hope were interesting. And just to think about who is really behind all the open source projects that we use out there. And I can't, well, I suppose I don't add this to everything, but this is Tokay and Palinka, our two Siamese kittens who we love very much. And thank you for coming. I will be, okay, you pretend you didn't see that URL on the bottom. I will be posting these slides on my website and, of course, on the ApacheCon website in the next day or two. And I am happy to take questions if there are any here. We've got another a good 5 minutes. Do we have any questions from somebody who's not a spoiler? Honest questions. Somebody? Okay, well, we can have Mark ask a question if he wants, because I know he'll be doing a good one. Okay, so I'll ask a question. We have one in the back, okay?
Where did the feather come from? Tell me about the origin story of the feather.
Rumor has it that right when Apache was founded, they needed something like a feather, but they didn't necessarily want to associate directly with the Apache nations, Native Americans in the US. But they did like the image. So the rumor has it, and this was the very few number of people who were software developers who were trying to figure out how to create, so there was very little attention they had. And in theory, somebody found an openly licensed Illustrator file of a graphic outline, recolored it to make the sort of gradation, and then said, hey, how about this? And everybody's like, okay. That was the original feather. This is feather 2.0, which is, I now finally think this is prettier than the original one. But more importantly, this one was designed by graphics people, so that when we send it out to print, it just prints, and the original one was very complicated underneath. Another in back, sure.
Yeah, so I'm a member of a project and I want to register my logo with Apache. How does that work?
If a PMC wants to better protect their brand, then come on over to Trademarks. In fact, we have the VP of Brand Management right here. There's a process on the website. So on the Foundation website, if you look for the trademark policy, there's a resources page on apache.org/foundation/marks/resources. I know that because I wrote it. That has a link to if you'd like to request registration. It needs to be the PMC asking, right, on behalf of the whole project. So just have a discussion on either your private or dev list, say you want to do it, show support, and then come ask Mark. That's the start of it. And more over here.
Thank you for the talk. I think it was very good. And I'm also very interested in what's behind things. For example, once I was wondering, like Maven Central, who's it run even by? Like everybody uses it. And I mean, it's not a secret, it's run by Sonatype, but imagine like Sonatype ran out of business and okay, maybe that's not the full truth, but
that's an excellent question, and that's where trademarks and reality and servers and bandwidth come into play. The ASF owns the Maven trademark, and we've had discussions with Sonatype about this in the past. Sonatype, of course, has the capacity to have who knows how much space and bandwidth. And we have effectively an agreement with them that they may do Maven Central under these conditions. We still own the trademark, but they run that, because that's a service clearly for all of us. And then if they have credit at the bottom saying they run the servers, that's fine too. But there's an agreement. It's not freeform.
Okay, that's great. I didn't know that. So my question was actually, what is the ASF doing to promote the Apache way of like open source and open governance? Like, how do we teach other projects who might not be knowing what they're doing maybe and just going for some foundation, whatever? How do we educate them to join the Apache Software Foundation?
You come to ApacheCon and stay for the community track tomorrow. That's one of the talks I'm doing. So as an organization, the ASF, we're not an advocacy organization, right? So we exist as an organization to support the projects who choose to come to us. And that's where we spend our organizational effort, right? That I, as a director, think about. When we decide where to spend budget, that's what we think about. That being said, there are a lot of committers and members at Apache who are very experienced in this, who do their own work outside. We also have the Community Development Project. So I don't know if you've gone over there, but community.apache.org is its own PMC that is about community development, and that's what they want to do. Is they want to be, in a way, the front page of the ASF for newcomers to explain where to go. Right? That's most of what the effort is. And that has a lot of people there who give talks at ApacheCon, at a lot of other conferences. We're certainly working on new initiatives in terms of having better materials that we could then reshare easily. But it's a long-term process. And to a degree, it's, again, we rely on volunteers. So I look forward to seeing you on the community development mailing list.
I'm already registered there, actually.
Great. Excellent.
Thanks.
So, in the front?
Okay, looking for some kind of suggestion. My company is really a small company, but we started to push to GitHub some of our internal projects. We want to open source them.
Mm-hmm.
My company doesn't know very much how open source works. Developers wanted to share.
No.
Okay. Why and how the company? When do you should care about protecting your open source project? You push it to GitHub. Everyone can download it, copy it, fork it.
Yes, anyone could. The question is, which people will come and do that? Like, forking it is great, but then people are taking it and doing their own thing. I imagine you're trying to open source something so that you participate with us on this thing to make it better together.
Yeah.
And then you also have some other business. That's the goal. To get the people to come who are going to spend the time and give good pull requests to your version, you need to have a brand that explains it. And the time to think about protecting it is now. And there are a few simple things, like using a consistent name, putting a the TM trademark symbol next to it. And then just being aware of it. That's what you need to do now. And if you gain popularity, then you need to think about some of the next steps. But that's exactly something that I talk about at conferences regularly, and we have a few other people who can sort of think about that kind of process. Is that a what?
Maybe you want to say something about first use doctrine, because otherwise.
So there's a question about first use versus first to file. So legally, you can claim a trademark. So I could say that I trademark my consulting services with Hawaiian shirts. If I always wear the same one, I always wear a Hawaiian shirt. But and I could say, hey, this is my trademark. I don't know how to protect that because everybody wears Hawaiian shirts, but okay. I claim it as my trademark, and it is. Now, that only gets me a certain amount of protection. If somebody then does try to wear a banana Hawaiian shirt and say, hey, I'm the best open source consultant. At that point, you can then go register your trademark in whichever countries. Every country, of course, has their own regime. The EU has an overarching one for the EU. That costs some money and that legal paperwork. Once you register a trademark and it gets approved, they may, of course, say that's too generic, right? Just wearing Hawaiian shirts, you can't. That's not unique enough. Once it gets approved, then you have a lot of protection against other people using it. So on the legal side, if you ask a lawyer, they will give you a very legal-focused answer on that, and it will be useful in the big picture. But if you're a small company and you just want to open source a few things and get them popular a little bit, you don't need that advice. You do need the advice of thinking about your trademark as something you want to protect, right? So you're thinking about it now. And then work on the community, work on the branding, right? Working on saying, hey, we want to welcome you to contribute. Work on the other things and just have a little bit of thought that hey, if this becomes popular, then we'll need to talk to the lawyers. But a lot of trademarks, in most cases, I mean, not when you get to the Oracle IBM level, a lot of trademark work is really, hey, this is our mark. We're already using it for a project from a year now. Sorry, you can't use it. And a lot of smaller groups will say, oh, we're sorry, right? It doesn't go through the courts. It's you've been using it consistently, you claim it.
And you did a little looking first to make sure nobody else was using it.
Yes. Well, we have many more. That's a question to properly answer. We need to sit down for a few hours and talk through all the things to think about. But that's the start, is consistent name, foo software product with little TM, and then just basically then being a good presence. And when I say consistent, I mean in your company website, on the GitHub repo, when you send out email blasts, right? That's the specific symbol that you want the public to associate with your copy of the software. So it needs to be consistent. That's one of the big questions, really. Because we're all engineers, and we all have reasons to format this file that way and that file that way, and we're like, yeah, we all know what it means. No, I don't know what it means. I've never seen your thing before. So I hope that helps. And we are out of time for the next speaker. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for the comments earlier on.